Good morning. My name is Alexandra Samstay. I work for Accro Energy, a renewable energy company based in Paris. I would like to start this panel by just one figure. We have currently 1 billion people all over the world lacking access to energy. And today we would like to discuss access to clean energy, because we cannot choose anymore between fighting for climate change and supporting access to energy. We have to reconcile both. Women, from the one negotiating at the top level to the one spurring project on the ground, are leading the charge. And this morning I have with me 3 outstanding women who are involved in the day-to-day of access to clean energy. So let me first start by welcoming Judith Harman. She is member of the executive committee of ENGIE, and she's pleased to be with us today. Thank you, Judith.
Thank you, it's great to be here.
Judith, renewable energy is a game changer since it allows for a decentralized approach to energy projects. How is ENGIE taping this potential for smaller projects?
It is indeed a world that is changing very fast when it comes to energy, with a huge shift obviously towards renewables, and it is really a thing that we have started to focus on a lot, I would say 5 years ago, and when I look at the speed of things, it's quite amazing of the change that has been happening. There's an important thing that you just said with renewables. It really leads to very much a decentralization of energy production. So, you know, before we would have very big plants, coal, gas, or whatever the types of generation was. And with solar and wind, you can have really much more distributed energy generation, which of course has an advantage because you can bring it to many places and really cover the needs. And like you said, there's still more than 1 billion people without access to energy. And obviously energy is important to improve livelihoods and drive economic growth. So a very important topic.
Thank you. ENGIE is transitioning from being a big traditional utility company to a one investing in decentralized energy. I assume this must imply huge change in your management process, in your business model. How have you and how do you handle this process, and how do you move on with this?
It is true that it is a big change for the organization, and I've mentioned 2 things when I started to talk. You know, I said decarbonization and I said decentralization. And when you look at where we started from, and when you look at energy production today on planet Earth, there is still 40% of energy generation that comes from coal. So when we decided 3 years ago to not do any new coal project, this was a major shift for the organization, and it was a major change management topic also, because there was still very good opportunities, or so our business development teams thought, to continue to develop coal, and yet we were of the firm conviction that wasn't the right way forward. You know, the decarbonization is of course something that needs to go even faster if we want to meet the climate goals, and obviously we cannot continue to build new coals. It was a big change, big discussions.
Did you feel lonely in the company at that time, 3 years ago?
I would say there was only a few of us who were convinced about this. It did take some conviction. At the time, you know, coal was still 10% of our results. And like I said, obviously there would have been opportunity if you thought you should go after it. So it was a big shift, but 3 years later it seems completely obvious that it was the right decision. And so for me, it tells you really that there's a lot of speed also. And as a leader, you have to think about what's next, and then really go after it, because you can really identify new opportunities, but also drive the market. You know, at the time, I mean, just for people to kind of get a sense of, we are the largest private electricity producer on planet Earth. So for us to make that statement and say we're not going to do new coal was a very big thing at the time. And like I said, it does seem obvious now, but it helped to move the entire system. There's now countries where you will not find a bank who is going to finance new development of coal. And so really collectively we're moving the system, and it is fascinating to see how the speed is picking up.
Yeah, building up on financing aspect, we know that technology and money is nowadays available for decentralized energy projects. But what is still preventing a smoother and faster implementation of those projects?
So I would distinguish two things. On the one hand, I said there's much more decentralized energy production that is possible with renewables. On the other hand, over 50% of the population today of planet Earth are living in big cities. So it's not going to be that, you know, everybody can have their own solar panel on their rooftop. So it is important to continue to have large-scale renewables, but then also, of course, create the opportunities for very distributed models. And when you look about what needs to change in the system, of course, a lot of these needs are in in developing countries, in emerging countries, in countries where it's harder to get access to financing. And so really one of the things that we have been working on with our partners is to create a system where you can have a collective insurance, try and have collective regulation. There's some African countries that are working on standardizing their regulation. So as an investor, when you come in, you know what kind of framework you're going into. Because as always, if you don't find the money, then you're not going to be able to drive those investments. And so that has been a very important topic for us to drive forward.
This standardization, you're referring to the work carried out by the International Solar Alliance, right? And is this something that you need as a utility to move faster, or can you do without? Is it a must-go for you?
So for us, there is still lots of opportunity also in many of the developed markets. We have literally doubled our renewables capacity over the last 3 years. And even I look at this year, you know, you can really see how we're picking up speed. So investment is possible. And obviously we're doing it very successfully. But when you look at the billion people that are without access to energy today, they tend to be in many of the African countries, some of Asia. And so if you want to bring energy to those places, that's when you start to need the frameworks of making sure that you have a more standardized legislation and find more standardized financing solutions. So you mentioned earlier some of the initiatives. Terawatt Initiative is one that is obviously working on this, and that remains a big goal for us to drive forward.
Thank you, Judith. I would like now to welcome Rachel Kite. Rachel is CEO of Sustainable Energy for All. Please welcome her. So, Rachel,
Can I lie down?
You can lay down. It's okay. I can question. You're running an organization called Sustainable Energy for All. Maybe not all of the audience know about this. You have a big focus on clean cooking. And could you explain what are the challenges and why do you focus on this specific area?
So Sustainable Energy for All was created by the previous Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, and has been taken on by Antonio Guterres, the current Secretary General, and is focused on the 7th of the Sustainable Development Goals. That goal is that there should be universal access, and Judith already talked about around about 1 billion people who don't have access to electricity. It's also about having much more renewable energy in the mix, and of course that's been made more urgent now by the reports of the scientists of the IPCC and the Paris Agreement. And then there's a need to double the rate of improvement of energy efficiency in the system. So we have to be more efficient, we have to have a completely different energy mix, and we have to get energy to everybody. And embedded in that is clean fuels for cooking. And about 2.8 billion people today can't cook cleanly, which seems utterly bizarre when you think about it, that many people face a choice, and when I say that many people, it's mainly women, who face the choice of putting a meal in front of the family and endangering their own health and endangering the health of their children or whoever is crowded around. Most of those people are using wood or charcoal or animal dung, biomass, and we know that the pollutants that come from that, the particulate matter, is deeply harmful. And the WHO has shown, and just recently had a global conference for the first time on air pollution, has shown that indoor air pollution is a leading cause of death and disease or impairment for millions of people. So the question is, why is this not being fixed? I mean, getting clean fuels to people so that they can cook would seem to be, something that's within our grasp as a species. And that's where we get into all kinds of dynamics around, well, it's women, it's a silent problem, it's not something that creeps its way up the priority list of the cabinet table and the head of state or the minister. It has, interesting relationships to deforestation, to remoteness of communities. But I think we've also sort of made a little bit of a development fetish around this and sort of focused on, we've got to get some kind of stove designed by men many, many millions of miles away, into every sort of household of poor women, and we're going to decide what's best for you. Normally, what you would want to do is empower the women, give them the resources by which they can obtain clean fuels affordably, and then that market will lead to innovation, and people can design fuels to use that, design stoves to use that fuel. So I think that we've looked at it in a rather patronising way as an issue over many years, and there's been lots of people trying to fix it, and good things are happening, but just not at speed and just not at scale.
Right. Talking about women, there is a kind of population that you address specifically that you call the last mile population. And this is important to address when we speak about access to clean energy. Could you explain us who they are, what is the proportion of women, and how do you ensure that project on the ground actually targets these people?
So we have 1 billion people without access to electricity. We have 2.8 billion people who don't have access to clean fuels for cooking. We have, most of those people are concentrated in countries in South Asia and countries across sub-Saharan Africa. And in fact, just 20 countries account for 80% of those who don't have access to electricity, and another 20 countries account for people who don't have access to clean fuels for cooking. So it's a known, right? This is not something that we can't put our arms around. And traditionally, the mental mindset of the energy industry, which is now beginning to change because of people like Isabelle Cocher at Engie and her team and others, has been that we will have a centralised system of electricity generation. We're going to put fossil fuels into that, we'll burn it, it will then go out through a centralised grid, and it will get as far as we can afford for it to go. And we subsidise the fossil fuels in, and we subsidise the price so that we don't have riots on the street. What we're suggesting is if we're serious about closing the access gap, we shift our mental model and we think about what is the level of energy service that every body needs and every business will need, and then building energy efficiency, thinking about renewable energy, and sort of build the picture bottom up. And if you put the last mile first, and they're not the people that you can't afford to reach, but they are the people that you will reach, and then everybody else in between will get served as well. You might start designing energy systems in the future which are much more distributed or decentralized. We can benefit from the digitalization that's happening within the energy sector. It will, of course, have to be decarbonized, because these people who are living at the last mile are already the victims of climate change impacts. And if we can just turn, we may have to not quite generate we may not have to generate as much. We may not have to have the subsidies applied the way that they are at the moment. we can afford to do this, but it's going to require a complete shift in thinking about what energy systems of the future look like, because they will not look like the energy systems of the past.
And does this shift in paradigm has an impact on democracy? Can you see that?
Yeah, if you digitalize, decentralize, and decarbonize energy systems, you are effectively democratizing them, because you're going to get your energy from your building, from your car, from a microgrid, from the grid. Your health clinic might be a hub for energy generation, giving you access to good quality health services and helping the village around operate. There may be a cold storage for medicines in your village, which is actually owned by a food conglomerate, because they need to be able to store farmers' products before they get to market. So energy provision is going to come from all kinds of different places, not the traditional model of the energy utility. And so we're in this transition. We're moving towards where we need to go. And companies like Engie, and we're going to hear from ExxonMobil in a moment, have got one foot in the future and one foot in the past. And what's really interesting is to watch how quickly they transfer the balance of weight off the back foot onto the front foot. And the ones that do it quickly will be the ones that survive.
Well, thanks a lot, Rachel. I will now welcome Janet Matsushita. She's Regional Director of ExxonMobil Fuel and Lubricant Business at ExxonMobil. Please welcome Janet. Janet, thank you. I think we all agree here that having ExxonMobil on stage discussing access to clean energy today with us is really interesting. What is the driving force besides the usual consensus that we need to fight for climate change, that you are here today, that you want to demonstrate you are part of the solution? Can you tell us about that?
Thank you, Alexandra. I just wanted to say it's my honor and pleasure to be here today and to be with such a prestigious panel. And I'm looking forward to sharing a little bit about ExxonMobil's approach to future energy. Maybe I'll tell you just a little bit about me. I am actually a Canadian born in Oakville, Ontario, which is a little town in the middle of Canada. I'm a chemical engineer with an MBA. When I graduated from Dalhousie University, I actually joined ExxonMobil as my first job at Sarnia Refinery, which is a refinery on the Great Lakes, which is actually between Canada and USA. And I've actually had over 30 years with ExxonMobil. I've had the opportunity of 17 different jobs in Canada, the USA, Asia Pacific, and Europe. And I'm very, very pleased to be able to be here today to talk about ExxonMobil, our support for the Paris Agreement, and our efforts to address the climate challenge. Now, ExxonMobil, some people may not realize, I guess from a recognition perspective, we're sort of some people know us as Esso, some people know us as Mobil. But we're a technology company at the end of the day. And we look at leveraging our technology to be able to make a difference in terms of looking at low-emission energy for the future. And I wanted to share just a couple things in our portfolio of work that we're doing to really make a difference. I didn't know if people recognize that ExxonMobil has actually invested, working with over 80 universities and multiple companies, and we put $9 billion into the development of new low-emission sustainable technologies. And that's since 2000, so this isn't something new for us. And two of the new projects that we have that I'm particularly excited about, maybe I'll share with you, and there are new emerging technologies. We are working in collaboration with a company called Fuel Cell Energy in the development of fuel cells. And think about fuel cells is they're actually like a series of little batteries or a membrane that actually, if you attach this to the flue gas of a fuel-fired power plant, It actually takes the CO2 out of the exhaust before it goes to the atmosphere. It stores it, and it creates electricity. This is a paradigm that me as an engineer would never have thought about. Imagine taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, putting it into storage and creating energy on its own. I consider this a paradigm that we had never really thought about. And we're really looking forward to our team working this to be able to take this pilot plant that takes 90% as our objective, to take 90% of the CO2 out of the exhaust and create energy, turn that pilot plant into commercially available technology available for the globe. I think it is just absolutely changing in terms of what we can do. The other area that I just love, and it's actually one of my favorites, is algae. And I'm not sure, to make sure we're on the same page, what is algae? It is that microorganism, green stuff that grows on the top of ponds. And the amazing thing about algae is it actually takes energy from the sun, CO2 from the atmosphere. It can grow in brackish water, which is actually land that you can never use for growing crops. It actually purifies the water, and it actually grows and generates these lipids that actually are oil, and that oil can actually be put into a vehicle as a fuel to actually run a vehicle itself. So we've partnered actually with SGI, Synthetic Genomics, to develop this technology, and it's just one that I'm so excited about. When you think about it, is absolutely going to transform our view of what is sustainable fuel. And if you're really interested, we actually have Wade Maxwell, who's an ExxonMobil vice president, is actually going to be talking about that on Friday afternoon. And Wade is one of our senior male mentors, and I'm sure if you're interested in the technology, he'll give you all the details.
Janet, you are in charge of all refineries over the world, except the US, which is still a lot of refineries. What do you do to reduce the carbon footprint of these refineries? How do you change your processes?
Absolutely. I guess my title is Regional Director of Europe, Asia, Africa, Europe, Middle East, Asia, Africa, and actually, in simple terms, what I do is I have responsibility for all of the ExxonMobil refineries outside of North America. So that's 11 refineries and 3 joint ventures. ExxonMobil is absolutely committed in providing the smallest footprint that we can from a manufacturing perspective and maximizing our energy efficiency. And we made a commitment in 2002 to the API to reduce and improve our energy efficiency by 10%, and we have done that. The corporation itself has actually reduced freshwater consumption by over 20%. And I'm particularly proud of my region. We are in the top 25% of the most energy efficient refineries in our region. And we're not done. We're continuing to apply technologies to actually further improve our energy efficiency, and I feel really good about that. What I would tell you is one perspective I'd share with you about energy, which actually we've talked about to a certain extent. I was actually in 2012 a refinery manager in New Orleans when Hurricane Isaac actually hit. And in that period, it took out our power for our home for 2 consecutive weeks. And that meant not just that the kids couldn't play with computers and electronics, it meant there were no lights, that I had no electricity to cook on the stove, I had no refrigerator for perishable goods, and actually I had no water at the tap. And then if you wanted mobility, because all the refineries were shut down associated with the hurricane, there were blocks and blocks of cars lined up to try to get fuel. So your mobility was limited and there were no buses. And that time reminded me of that 19th century economist, Stanley Jevons, and he said, without energy, we're thrown back into a laborious poverty of previous ages. And that's certainly how I felt. And I guess I'd say to you, similar to what we had talked about, if you look at the 3 people to your left, just turn and look at the 3 people to your left. Maybe look at the 3 people to your right. And would one of you be willing to give up electricity? Because that is actually what we have in the globe today. 1 in 7 does not have electricity, as we talked about. It's 1 billion people. So ExxonMobil's mission is to provide safe, affordable energy to help people raise their quality of life and to do it in a very conscious, energy efficient manner.
Thank you, Janet. It's always very interesting to have all the stakeholders on the stage to speak about these issues, because it's only by being united that we'll be able to effectively address climate change. And we're just 11 years before 2030, which means it leaves us with 11 years to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals and the Paris Agreement goals. So I'm asking to each of you, will we get there, and how will we get there? Rachel, do you want to start?
So I want to, I'm going to be quick, but I just want to take you where I was in July. So in July I was in the south of Niger, where the penetration of electricity rate sort of is single digit, like less than 10% of the people have access to electricity. And in the south of Niger, the drought cycle has completely changed. It used to be one every 10 years, there was one every 5, there was one every 2. They're basically living in perpetual drought now. So what was already a challenging existence has now been made almost unbearable because of climate change. It is also an area that is becoming increasingly insecure as people are forced to move up north towards this continent, where people see promise, an opportunity, and an ability to survive. And that is bringing with it all kinds of political tensions within this part of the world. The solution for these people is not violent extremism, but that's on offer. The solution for these people is access to energy services which will allow them to improve their crop yield, solar-powered irrigation, electricity systems that will allow them to run a clinic and have access to healthcare. I went to the only hospital for 1,000 miles that would treat obstetric fistula, because child marriage is rife, and when you try to have a child when you're only 12 or 13, this can be complicated for women and very dangerous. There was one doctor, but his electricity went out 27 times a day. And there was a generator out the back that was older than I am. Let me tell you, you do not want your generator to be older than me. So you want solar systems on the roof, and you want diesel gensets in the back, but modern ones. This is not unaffordable. This is not expensive. This is what we do. But let me tell you, if we are going to get access to electricity to these people so that they can survive and be resilient to climate change, so that they can make their economies productive, and so that we don't have the wave of migration that people fear and is not good for anybody, right? We are going to have to provide that electricity, but that electricity is going to have to be distributed, and it's going to have to be renewable, because we are over with our carbon emission budget. And so we need the deep technology and the deep expertise of companies like Exxon, and we need them to be extremely efficient, as the refineries that Janet runs are becoming. And we need them to come with us in this decarbonisation. We need them to be transparent, not just Exxon, but the entire industry, transparent about how they're going to do that. Every company now under the TCFD has to say what kind of scenarios it imagines for itself, how will they be profitable under a 2-degree scenario, and now companies are going to have to start talking about how they're going to be profitable under a 1.5-degree scenario. But the point that I want to make is that the solution for those 1 billion people is not more carbon in the atmosphere.
Thank you. Judith.
So first of all, I think that we need to meet this goal. We only have one planet, and you can go through all sorts of crises in your life or in business. You can go through an economic crisis and recover, but once we've played the planet, then we will lose our future. So it is incredibly important that we meet all these targets. And the positive news are many of the solutions are there, and they're scalable, because what we're talking about is of course providing solutions at scale. There is certain items, some of them that were talked about, that we're still, there's a lot of research going on, and they might be solutions for the future, but there's many things that are that we're capable of doing now. We're able to do solar at a large scale. We're able to do wind. We're able to do storage. We can combine. We have software to analyze
and cost
what
of
energy exactly where energy is needed. Cost is decreasing massively, and so really. It is something that we can collectively work on, and it's not. I'm always very wary when it's presented if it was a contradiction between the environment and economics. It's not. It's not. It is a great business opportunity. It is a necessity for the planet, but it is also a great business opportunity, and that's why we will continue to invest in these solutions.
Thank you, Janet. You want to add on?
That really resonated with me. Are we still on? Okay. I like the way Judith talked about planet Earth. I always think about if you stood on the moon and you looked at planet Earth, you would notice that there are actually no country boundaries. And I think it is very important that we have regulators that recognize that this is a global issue. We need to be transparent in our regulations, and we need to make sure that it supports things like common carbon tax valuation, so that we're all working towards a common goal around trying to manage climate change. And I think we need to encourage technology. I actually believe as we meet the demands of the developing economies, I believe we need to find those breakthrough technologies that will make a big difference in terms of how we fuel the future, which is why I feel so really good about the work that we're doing at ExxonMobil in developing those technologies and bringing different ideas forward. And as a little bit of a pragmatist, but an optimist, I do feel very optimistic that if we bring this together, we can actually meet the climate change challenge.
Thank you. We're running a bit behind schedule, so I will move on to my very last question for each of you to answer. What is the one thing as a leader, as an organization, but most particularly as a woman, that you would like to do for access to clean energy? Rachel. Oh, sorry, Janet. I was pointing out to Janet saying Rachel.
I'm going to share a story that I don't often tell people. I actually come from an extremely humble beginning. My grandparents came from Japan and immigrated to Canada, and they did not speak English. And they were laborers. They were literally the people who would go and pick the fruits and the vegetables out of the field. They were paid by what you picked, by the kilogram. It was laborious work, it was backbreaking work, and my grandmother was the visionary, which I think, because women often in the family are the matriarchs that do that. And her vision was that her son would go to university, and she saved every penny, and they sent my father to university, and he became a mechanical engineer. And he paid that forward and insisted that his children would go to university. We'd go in the summer to work side by side with my grandparents, so we understood the value of a nickel in terms of how you earn it. And they sent me to university, and I became a chemical engineer. And that's why I am so passionate about education. It does change. It gives people the ability to change your living standard and the options that you have in the world, which makes me passionate in my support of ExxonMobil and their STEM program, which I think we talked about at the OECD yesterday, and you guys talked about this morning. That's around science, technology, engineering, and math. And ExxonMobil has actually donated, working with schools, $1.2 billion since 2000. Last year, we actually invested over $70 million. And it actually is to 45 universities, 1,000 schools, and over 50,000 teachers had that benefit across the globe in terms of raising the capability of our people. And that changes your ability to reach a different standard of living, and it creates that technical knowledge and know-how of the people who are actually going to be our future and come up with those great ideas about how we are going to be sustainable in the future. So I'm very, very excited about what we do at ExxonMobil, and I believe that is critical to our ability to be able to provide clean, affordable fuel and be able to meet the climate change requirements.
And we shall thank your grandma. Rachel. What is the one thing?
So the leaders in the energy industry now, well, first of all, we need more women leading in the energy industry, in the C-suite, in boardrooms, in every aspect of this. We've got lots of young women coming out of engineering schools now and out of law schools, et cetera, so we've just got to bring them all the way up. But you have to be able to close your eyes. You have to be able to stand in your town square, wherever you are in the world. I can stand in that village square in Niger. You have to close your eyes and imagine in 5 years' time that there is enough electricity, that it's clean, that it's running 24/7, it's reliable, it's affordable. And that means there's a clinic. That means that the young girl that grew up in that village can go to the capital city and train as a nurse and come back and have a job. It means that they can grow crops. It means they can add value to the crops because they've got cold storage, which means that they can actually start to push away the people who want to pick them off and take them and enlist them in violent extremism and have a different future. If you can close your eyes and you can imagine it, and we have the technology and we have the money, then we can build it. And for the young women in the room or the young women watching, this is yours to build. So only vote in people who are prepared to close their eyes and imagine that's what it will look like, not in 30 years' time, not in 25 years' time, in 5 years' time. Thank you.
Thank you. Judith.
So lots of great things already said. What I would add is, again, this is a huge opportunity for us to move towards more clean energy and to have more women involved. I would say this about any sector, and obviously there is many studies that show that there is more value creation and better decision making if you have more women. At ENGIE, we have really used this opportunity of going to a completely decentralized organization to find very diverse teams and to bring 30% of women also in leadership roles. And I think we need to continue on that because I truly believe it makes for better decisions. This is still a sector with very few women, and so there's still lots of work to do. But especially when you hear about the paradigm shifts, when you hear about the new ways of thinking that are necessary, the going from big centralized to decentralized to really giving access to the entire planet and doing the right thing for the planet, you need to bring the right people to the table, and having enough women sitting at the table to think about these new solutions, I think, is going to be a great part of the solution. And so for all of us to work on that is a very motivating and inspiring thing to do.
Thank you. I would like you to give a big round of applause for the 3 outstanding women. Thank you.